And welcome everybody to what is the state of the onion as it currently is or is not. We don't know yet because that's what we're here to decide. Basically, today we'll be talking, if we do talk at all, about the folly of atheism and what is now called deism, even with respect to the present life. And we'll be joined by Father Xbox, who's going to give us the first sermon on atheism. So thank you, Xbox. Welcome to the show. And what say you? What is atheism? What are we discussing about it? The folly of atheism. Is it really just bad reasoning? Is that what it is?
Yeah, no, it's the it's the exact opposite. I think we're here to talk more about new atheist, kind of ignorant, I don't want to say stupid, atheist that are coming into the great debate community and what they need to be prepared for, what they're going to face, things like that. Gonna kind of run around purpose, beliefs, definitions, goals, approaches to arguments, what kind of hill you want to die on. Like, are some arguments worth, making your case on? Maybe touch on logic, philosophy, and the weaponizing of philosophy to attack other beliefs. How does science play into it? And if we have time, maybe talk about logical fallacies a little bit, or at least highlight them. We don't have to get into every logical fallacy, but kind of get into all that. And I think the atheists would be better prepared for what they're coming. Because the question with the great debate usually is, does a God, or do you believe a God exists in reality or in this world? So let me throw it to first person that feels like speaking on any of that. Anybody want to jump in there?
Nick, if you would. Sorry, can I just request Nick to go first? Let's put him on the spot. I'm going to put him in the middle of the screen.
Sure. Here we go. Dear Lord. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. So could you narrow it down to one or two specific questions? And I can see, I mean, I identify as an anti-theist. I identify as a new atheist. That is a term that has morphed over time. So people, it's really a pejorative now. I don't mind that it's a pejorative, but it has changed in a way that, a lot of people that I don't like have adopted the term. So maybe it's time to move on. But I hold sort of more classic views on all of those things. But if there's a specific question that
let me help you out there. I'll start with usually in the definition, like I said, it's do you believe? Highlight on believe a God exists in reality is usually the question, and under that you end up with two categories, which would be a theist or a non-theist, right? Theist is going to be some form of belief in God or a God or gods, and the non-theists are going to be the opposite of that. You're going to have atheists, agnostics, theological non-cognitivists, anti-theists as well, and those are just the non-theist and theist are just kind of umbrella terms that hold this.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a very common sense and easy way to go about it. And so it's basically people who either hold the belief or people who do not hold the belief. There are times when it's beneficial to say it's people who hold the belief or people who hold the counter belief, and then you could put, either non-cogs or agnostics or whatever in sort of the middle to neither to that position. But I don't think that that's productive sort of for the everyday use of these kinds of discussions. I think that that's often done as sort of a way to try to wedge or bully certain positions, but there's also times when it's completely legit to do that. I think the most productive way is people who have that belief or people who do not. I think that makes the most common sense and is the way it's most commonly used. I think in everyday it does benefit. So if you're somebody who truly believes that there are no gods, and you're trying to get more people on your side and you're trying to normalize that belief, one thing that you do is you try to expand that tent. And so you include anyone who has no God belief whatsoever, not just someone who posits the opposite, saying that there are reasons to believe that there are no gods. So I think there is some deliberate attempt to make that a tent bigger, but I don't think that necessarily means that, hey, they're wrong or that that's a bad idea. The reality is there are plenty of countries in which not holding a God belief is the majority. They are considered atheist by most standards, and if we really need to bifurcate that and have nuns or have all the others, we can do that, but I think we all understand what most people mean when they say somebody who's an atheist versus someone who's a theist.
Yeah, I agree with you there. They just don't... Like, I take it as a positive, like a belief no God exists, or this certain God doesn't exist, and you would have reasons for it. They could be bad reasons even, but you would have a reason for it, and that's fine. And then I think that's a perfect way to go about it. And I mean, you get into the I just don't believe instead of a positive belief. You end up with odd things, with people saying, rocks and babies are atheists, and because they lack belief as well. But
I don't think
I think when you can go with things that are conscious beings making
well, and that's because of, so I mean, I've heard those arguments. I think they're largely disingenuous. When somebody says, okay, I lack a belief, even by saying the word I, you are necessarily saying that there are probably some preconditions to anyone who could make this kind of statement. For example, somebody who at least has the capacity to have that belief in the first place. Since a rock cannot have a belief in theism, it just can't. The claim that a rock does not believe in God or lacks that belief is a vacuous statement. It no longer has any meaning because it cannot possibly. So even applying the word belief to a rock is immediately a non sequitur. So while I admit that people make those arguments, I think they're disingenuous, and I think they don't undermine the so-called lack theist position in any meaningful way.
Right, yeah. That's a great point to point out there. Because a lot of new atheists do come with the position of, well, I don't have a burden to declare here. I just lack the belief. It's your burden to prove it to me. And I agree with that. It's a little disingenuous to go about it that way, because you are making a statement about reality, even if you're not verbalizing it. You don't believe in a God.
Oh, you're looking inside a cupboard, right? Think of it this way, right? Your belief in the existence of God sits in a space somewhere in your mind, right? It sits there. And when another theist comes along and says, "Hey, do you have a belief in God?" You open up your cupboard, you look at it, it's sitting there. When a theist comes along and says, "Hey, do you have a belief in a God?" You open up the cupboard, there's nothing sitting there, right? You don't have to prove that there's nothing sitting there. There's nothing sitting there. So I don't know, like, you're not, especially for a person like me who's not an anti-theist. You worship whatever gods you want to. It's just, I don't. Right?
Well, I think the lack theist claim comes specifically from theists doing the reverse. So if a theist comes up to you and says, "Do you believe in a God?" and you say no, that is not necessarily saying I specifically believe in the lack of a God. And I think what theists do is they say, okay, prove that one does not exist. So they group everybody, including people who don't have a God belief, into the you must be positing that there is no God. It's like, if I do not believe in the Christian God, I think what's happening is we're seeing a swing from, because there hasn't been a language. If you just say no, the assumption is, okay, you believe there is no Christian God, so prove it. It's like, no, I said no, I don't believe in a Christian God. They have negation raised that claim. And negation raising, actually, English lends towards negation raising. Other languages don't as much. But the idea that if you say, for example, I don't want to die, everybody implicitly takes that as a positive claim that I want to live, because we negation raise that claim, but that was not the claim. In English, negation raising is common. This kind of thing doesn't actually happen as often in other languages.
The problem with using that as an analogy is that dying and living are dichotomous, right? You're either one or the other, right? Whereas in between believing in a God and not believing in a God, there's apparently 120 different fucking positions depending on how you do your yoga and what Steve McRae thinks. And
no, I don't think that's true. I think you could have no stance on living or dying. You could be completely
correct
towards living or dying. And so the statement that I don't want to die doesn't mean that you want to live. You could be apathetic about that. Go, well, I don't care about either one, either way.
And there are degrees to which there's still degrees. It's the claim is what I want, not about living or dying. So since there can be degrees of my desire to stay alive, when you say, if somebody pulls a gun to you and you say, please, please, I don't want to die, everybody takes that as saying, I want to live, but it's actually a separate claim. The negation has been raised.
And I think a better analogy, I use an analogy. I mean, I liked your cupboard one, but it sort of assumes you can see what's in the cupboard, and you're talking about belief. I use an analogy called the shrouded room. And that is that somebody makes a claim about a room that you can't enter, you can't, you have no way of looking into, you've got no way of investigating at all, and sort of says, okay, there's a horse in that room. It is perfectly acceptable to say, well, I don't know what's in that room, but it wouldn't be up to you to show that there is no horse in that room, right? And just because you are saying, I don't know what's in the next room, doesn't mean that you're saying there is nothing in the next room. There could very well be a horse in there. There could be a giraffe in there. There could be an elephant in there. There could be all kinds of things in there. You're not saying that the room is empty. You're saying, I have no access to that room.
I agree with everything that you're saying. Would the anti-theist then have the positive claim that would need to prove that the horse doesn't exist?
Well, that's not an anti-theist position.
No, I'm saying for Nick. Nick announced himself as an anti-theist.
Sure.
Would he then? So that's a positive claim, correct?
As an anti-theist, my claim as an anti-theist is that theistic religions, and by theistic religions I mean theism in the classical sense, which is not the sense in which it's been defined here. Theistic religions are necessarily and by definition dangerous to society and must be opposed by all moral agents. That is my claim, and I am prepared to defend that. Yes.
Well, it sounds like you're really more anti-religious than anti-theist then.
Anti-religious is currently what most people call anti-theism. It's not the way Hitchens uses it. It's not the way it's used in England still, and it is what most people consider to be classical theism. So I say when I am anti-theist, I'm using theist the way it was used about 20 years ago and about 1,000 years prior to that. It's only recently that the definition's changed.
Let's sort of define our terms a bit more clearly then. So maybe we can stick to the sort of strong and weak atheist positions if we're going to talk about it. So would you say, Nick, that a strong atheist position has a burden of proof?
Yes, it does.
What's the difference between a strong and a weak?
Well, a weak atheist position, sort of in the sort of the definitions that we're using in the common everyday sort of not philosophy of religion. A weak atheist is just like an agnostic in philosophy of religion. They just lack a belief. So the lack theist would be the weak atheist position. And a strong atheist position would be like me or Nick that says, I believe that there is no God.
Correct. And that does bear a burden of proof, but I believe also that what happens is people take a weak atheist and try to force them into a strong atheist position or say that they have some kind of burden, because theists have a tendency to say anyone who answers, if you ask the question, do you believe in God? And the answer is no. They necessarily have a burden of proof, and that is not true, but that is a position that people get forced into.
Yeah, let me
I
push
think-
this back to the center a little bit where we were. That this is trying to explain more to an atheist or to new atheist that they need to look into their beliefs and have reasons for those beliefs. This doesn't mean you have to know. This doesn't mean you have to have certainty about anything.
Sure.
But against that claim, you would need reasons for your beliefs
course.
when you look
Just
into
it would have to be justifiable.
Yes.
Right. Exactly.
But I
yeah,
think
and
one
that,
of the
that, that
things
was the
that-
only point I was trying to make with the definitions.
Well,
That,
I think
like,
one
we
of
don't
the
have to
things that
dig deep
theists
into them.
do, what the theists do, and especially pre-subs, is they take, because theism is obviously about belief, so it's about what you believe to be true. And they sort of take it as if you have a belief that there are no gods, they take it as you've got to logically demonstrate that a god is impossible, or you've got to claim some sort of strong knowledge claim that there is no god. And that isn't necessarily the case. Just for myself, my belief that there are no gods is grounded in the fact that we have never ever seen any kind of mind without a physical brain to encompass it, without that sort of physical brain. And we've seen millions of minds, or we've observed or been aware of millions of minds. Not one of them has no brain. So this whole idea that of a sort of detached from a brain mind, that is the reason why I don't believe that exists. If someone could show a disembodied, I suppose, mind, then I would be more. I would probably like dip into the weak atheist position, or agnostic, depending on how you're using the terms. But that's never been demonstrated to me. So that's why I feel confident in saying that I believe there are no gods.
Okay, but I think for a weak atheist, a positive belief is smuggled in. It's just never addressed because no one really wants to take the step back to address it.
Smuggled in what circumstances? Like by whom and what are they smuggling it in when defending weak atheism, or are theists smuggling it in when they're talking to?
I don't think they know they're doing it most of the time.
Okay.
Is there a weak atheist in the room?
Yeah.
I was going to give the example instead of just.
Well, I just got told because I wasn't an anti-theist and I'm kind of a lack-theist. So I guess that's me.
Oh.
Right, but do you have a belief that there isn't a God, or do you just lack a belief?
I lack belief in the existence of God.
Okay. Would you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to ask you this question. Would you say that you have a general belief about how reality is, and that you live your life according to that belief, even if you do so subconsciously most of the time?
I might be the wrong person to ask that question because I have an extremely wild imagination and fling my life into reality despite the fact of the things I can imagine. So I guess I don't know how to answer that question.
But if you're going where I think you're going with this, which is that he lives his life according to the idea that there is no God, you could make that for every possible claim in the universe, which would be, okay, we could be actually a zoo that's been manufactured by aliens on Mars who are watching us, and do you live, if you don't believe that, do you live your life according to the fact that you don't believe that, and does that somehow shoehorn in a positive claim?
Well, kind of, not quite. I'm getting at is
you have to live your life no matter what reality. Like, if there was if every time you stuck your car key in the car door and turned it, there was a 15% chance you'd go boop and turn into an octopus, you'd still have to live your life as though that wasn't going to happen, because otherwise you'd be paralyzed, right? Like,
I'd never lock the door.
But what I was trying to point out is people, even lack-theists, have a general belief about how reality functions around them and what's going to happen to them when they do things and live their life. And if you ask them, does that belief include a God, they're going to say no, which means they have a positive belief that entails there being no God.
Yeah, you see, you made an
No.
extra step, because if they just have a positive belief that you should not act as if something is real until it has been demonstrated, then you can include in that God and any myriad of a bazillion other beliefs
Yeah.
that none of us have as a positive belief, but just act as if it's not true because it has not been evidenced yet. That is a necessary way of just functioning in life. And if you were to say that every one of those is a positive belief, then there's no such thing as something somebody doesn't believe in. Everybody has a positive belief about absolutely everything, I think, is what happens if you do a reducto on your claim.
Well, they have a positive belief
So
on a particular stance about everything. But
No, a positive belief
all the
on
same
everything.
belief.
Everything
all
is
the
then a
same
positive belief. So then that word becomes meaningless, because everything is now a positive belief by the way you framed it. Absolutely every belief you hold is a positive one.
I think it entails one, because I don't think they actually get that specific belief. Because I wouldn't, when I do that, when I'm arguing with someone, I don't then start asking them about their positive belief about a God. I start asking for their justification of why they believe reality is that way.
Well, everybody
Well,
agrees
so
that
I think
reality.
you're-
Hang on a second. Hang on. We all sort of ground in a sort of physical reality, right? Even the theists operate in that apparent reality that we're in. You can easily sort of say, hey, I have my senses. They feed me information about the apparent reality around me. Because you don't bring a God into that as some sort of cause or some sort of belief system, doesn't mean you have to accommodate for that God in that apparent reality around you, because you have direct input from your senses. And everybody operates in that reality, not just sort of, weak atheists.
Here, let me try to center y'all again. This is 4 new atheists that are entering the great debate. Like, what kind of advice and things like that?
Oh,
would
it's about
you give
advice.
them?
If I could just interrupt a second, Piper, you were going to say something. I'd like to get you in
Yeah,
here.
sorry, Piper.
Oh
Sorry.
yeah, thanks.
Absolutely.
That's all right.
No, it's. I mean, I was just gonna say that I think Cerberus is sort of papering over a basic point of logic, and I don't have some investment in lack theism. I mean, the way that I think about it is, you're a theist, agnostic, or atheist, or apatheist, I guess, if you want to add that option, right? So I don't make that distinction, but I do think you're sort of so. I can have a sort of world view, right? I could have what beliefs about the world, and maybe they interconnect in a certain way, right? Now, let's say one of those beliefs isn't the belief that there is a God, right? But that doesn't mean that one of those beliefs is the belief that there isn't a God, right? Like those two things just aren't semantically equivalent, right?
Yeah, that's not what I'm saying, though.
But I think if you do a reducto on your claim, I don't think there's any way to avoid saying that if you follow it logically. I think you necessarily actually are saying that if you map out the argument to its conclusion.
Yeah, but I
So
think the position I'm asking to justify basically just requires the response of what's the justification for having this belief, and simply just saying I have not seen any evidence to make me believe the reality is different.
But as soon as you say this belief, you've just done it. That's my point.
Yeah.
You're saying it's a
But it is
belief
a
at some
belief.
point, and they have to. And what I'm saying is, I think it isn't. And I think if you make that claim, what you will find is every single instance in which someone claims not to hold a belief, you are actually arguing that they in fact hold the opposite belief, and everything is either believed or its opposite is believed, and that is not accurate. And I think what you just said, if you follow your position logically, you said, well, I'm asking them to justify their belief. Exactly. And if their position is that they don't have a belief, you have now eliminated that as what you seem to be suggesting is that is not a defense that anyone can use to any lack belief position, which entails necessarily that everyone must either believe a thing or believe its opposite. I don't think you mean to do that, but I think that's what you've done.
Can we go back to my example of the shrouded room that I used, right? So that would mean that me looking at the room and saying, well, I don't know what's in the next room, that would entail that I have a belief about every animal in the animal kingdom, as well as no animal at all, which, is sort of, how is that possible? If like, I've got an opinion on ferrets, I've got an opinion, but if somebody says, so there's nothing in there, I would say, well, no, I don't know what's in there.
Okay, would you say that you have a belief about reality, like just generally how
Sure.
it is?
Everyone has beliefs about reality.
Okay,
Sure.
does that belief exclude unicorns?
Does it exclude unicorns?
That belief
Yeah,
neither
sure.
that belief does not either exclude or include unicorns. That belief does include a sub belief, which is that I've seen no evidence for unicorns, ergo I do not believe they exist.
So it
But
excludes
I'm a-
unicorns.
But
There's
I'm
no
a
It
unicorns
hard
in it.
does,
unicorn
you see, you do
theist.
not permit. Okay, so does that belief include that Russians are actually aliens who have been planted here from the planet Kazatl, and so on and so forth, and you are not permitting anyone to make a lack claim? I apologize. I
Well, no,
always get that one
I
wrong.
let them do it. It's just either the belief either has unicorns or it doesn't have unicorns.
But it's
And
a
therefore,
possibility.
I am going to have to.
It's a true
I just want
dichotomy.
to say this. What that means is every single possible position, including every lack belief position, is a dichotomy, and I have never heard that held, and I don't think most forms of logic actually permit that. But what I'm saying is your position is necessarily entailing that there is no such thing as a lack of belief in anything. Everything. Absolutely everything is a positive belief claim, and if that's true, then that becomes vacuous because there's no such thing as a non-positive belief claim.
no,
That is
everyone
the
has
result of what you're saying.
Everyone has a positive belief in how reality generally is around them.
And
Look,
in every
Severus,
element of it,
And that has
according to you.
implications on all their
Look,
lacks of belief.
I've got to address this because the unicorn thing is a false analogy. Because I'm not agnostic, to use the philosophy of religion term, on unicorns. I don't believe that unicorns exist, so it's not a good analogy to use. You would have to use something that I don't know. Did Putin set up these things? Sorry, I was watching In Time earlier, Nick. Did Putin set up this thing so the mercenaries take over, and get him out of trouble? I don't know. I don't have a stance on that because I honestly
so
don't
it currently
know.
excludes that.
Right, I just got to stop
Currently
you.
excludes
Mark,
It excludes
How does
what?
that
hang on,
What
hang
do
on a minute.
you mean by
Guys,
excludes?
Please, hang on a minute before you go there, Mark. I just need to correct you on something. If in fact
Yeah.
it was a mistake, or just get a clarification.
Sure.
You said you do not believe in X, but you're not an agnostic. Well, those two things are not mutually exclusive. So, did you mean to say I believe
Well,
unicorns do not
um,
exist? I'm not agnostic.
No, I'm talking about philosophy of religion, where agnostic is the I don't know position kind of thing.
Right, but that's
So
consistent
that's-
with the I do not believe position.
Well, and I think what he was saying.
When he
But I
said,
think what he was
"I do
saying was
not
they're not.
believe," he
It's a
meant,
bad
"I believe
example.
it's not true."
Well, I got to throw in there that that's not the agnostic position. The
Well,
agnostic
hold-
position is I don't
Okay,
believe.
let's-
One
Just to
way or
clarify, because
another.
I think what he's saying is because the argument is about a lack theist position, using the unicorn is a bad example because that is not a lack theist example. That is an
Correct.
example where he actively does not believe in unicorns. So in order to have this discussion, regardless of his beliefs aside, because he is arguing about the lack theist position, the unicorn example is a bad example. Is that correct, Mark?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
I was a
sorry.
little confused there. That's okay.
No, I changed. Yeah, sorry, that's my fault. I changed sort of terms halfway through, and that's probably a terrible thing to do. So it's absolutely
It's
my fault.
okay.
Do y'all want to move on a little bit to
Well, can I say
another
something to
topic on
Cerberus
this,
very
or do you want to
quickly?
stick on
Advice for
the
new atheists?
definition?
Can I say
Yeah.
something to Cerberus very quickly?
Go ahead, Piper.
Yeah. So, when you say that it's, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding your point, but it seems like you're saying, well, if I have a sort of view of the world that doesn't include a belief that God exists, right? Then my view of the world sort of excludes God, right? And so maybe that's in some way equivalent to believing that God doesn't exist. Am I correct? That's kind of what you're saying.
It implies it because you do have a positive belief about how reality is.
So
in general, and then if it doesn't have God in it, then you have a positive belief that implies there is no God.
So what I'm saying is that, or what I want to say to you is that that there's not a logical implication there, right? So the way that it's accurate to use the word exclude there is that your worldview doesn't include, right, a belief that God exists, right? But that doesn't mean, strictly logically speaking, that it does include the belief that God doesn't exist, right?
Well, it would at a given state. If it doesn't include it, then it's excluded.
No. But
Yeah.
here,
The only way it wouldn't be excluded is
exclude-
if you're someone that's unaware of the proposition.
No. But so exclude here, right? The most accurate way you can use that term is in the sense that it just doesn't include it, right? But not including the belief that God does exist doesn't logically imply including the belief that God doesn't exist, right?
But
there
if
just
you've
is
been made
not a
aware,
logical entailment there.
well, so if you have this general positive belief, and then you've been made aware of a proposition, and you've thought about that proposition, you've either decided to include it into your general belief or exclude it from your general belief.
So let's do it this way, right? So let's just think about agnostic, the term, like Marx says, the term used in the philosophy of religion, agnostic, right? So, someone who suspends judgment on whether a God exists, right? Now that person has a view of the world that doesn't include the belief that God exists, right?
Yeah.
But he also has a view of the world that doesn't include the belief that God doesn't exist, right? So if what you're saying is true, right, that person is somehow not actually an agnostic, they're an atheist.
No, they're still agnostic, because agnostic is defined by a specific belief about a deity.
I'm not sure what you mean there.
We're talking about two different beliefs. I'm saying if this is a separate belief, the general belief about reality, right? Agnostic is generally defined as, if you want to keep it on the belief scale, someone who doesn't know what to believe.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I mean, it sort of depends. If you're
That's the reasoning why. Real quick, that's the reasoning why they would exclude it from their general belief about reality, is because they don't know if it's true or not.
Well, but so when they say I don't know if it's true or not, right?
Yeah.
What they mean is I don't believe either that God exists or that God doesn't exist, right? And so in that situation,
that's
not
just the reasoning for why it's not included.
Yeah. But in that situation, right, not including the belief that God does exist can't imply including the belief that God doesn't exist, because that person has neither belief.
Now, excluding the belief and then having the belief are two different things, right? They're not excluding it because they don't have it in the belief. They're looking at the proposition, thinking about it, considering it to whatever degree they consider it.
That's what the agnostic is doing, yet they still don't believe that God doesn't exist.
And then they make a determination of whether to include that into a general set of beliefs about reality.
Yeah, that's fine. The agnostic.
Yeah, and then you have a choice. You either include it or exclude it.
Yeah.
Right, I'm an agnostic, and I don't believe a God exists, and I don't believe a God doesn't exist, would be the way you're trying to phrase it.
Yeah. Yet you lack the positive, if you're a atheist, you lack the positive belief that there is a God, but you have a positive belief that excludes a God. And that's what I would then ask you to justify.
No, so if Atheist is compatible with simply not believing that a God exists, right? That's what Atheist is, right? That's going to be compatible with not believing that God doesn't exist as well, right? Logically. So there's no logical entailment, right? Just from being a Atheist to being an atheist in the so-called hard sense, right?
Meanwhile, back at the ranch.
Yeah. So if I'm asking a atheist about their general belief about reality, and then I ask them, does that include a God? If you have issues with excluding, that's fine. Well, I'll try not to use it. I ask them about why that belief doesn't include a God, and they're going to say, well, just because I don't believe it. I'm going to ask for a justification because this is a positive belief.
Yeah, but doesn't get away from it? Doesn't that change if we're talking about a creator God versus any other kind of concept of God?
Well, you could ask the same question about any concept of God, yeah.
I mean, I think
it wouldn't. But you wouldn't ever need to actually shift back to reality. You know, it'd be like trying to say, like, okay, there's a shrouded room. Let's say the shrouded room is reality, and in order for the shrouded room to exist, there must be a horse within it. But I've never seen a horse within it, so I don't believe in the horse. And you're like, well, where did the shrouded room come from? Right? It depends on the relationship you're setting up between reality and the God. It's very easy to be agnostic about a God like Thor or Zeus because they're kind of contingent upon the reality that we all share with them. But if you define that God as being that which reality itself is contingent upon, then the theist just shifts the burden back onto you and says, well, wait a minute, how do you go about reconciling how there's something rather than nothing? And they'll be like, well, I don't know. And they're like, well, you have to justify that because now you're taking a positive stance that the thing that which all reality depends on doesn't in fact exist. And I'm trying to say as a theist that must be a god. And then we just keep going around and around.
Well,
in
so I
circles.
think that's sort of like
Yeah, this is a little different
that,
from that, though.
I think that's sort of the thing that Dark
How?
Hawkins does. But like
I'm not asking about why is there something rather than nothing.
Well,
But if
I
you're
think
asking
that-
somebody, if you ask somebody like, do you or do you not have a positive belief in God? Or like you said, I don't start off with that. I'll start off with asking them about reality. If you're starting asking them about reality, then you're kind of automatically, implicitly setting them up for a discussion about a God as defined in classical theism, which is the definitive and necessary creator of that reality. That's
Right, and
that's
that's
going to be a
what-
different one than a God that's just
Well,
maybe dependent on stories or
well,
other
no,
beings.
because I haven't.
And that's
Like
the
you
question.
could,
that,
but
hold
I
on.
don't usually
Hold on,
ask
hold
them
on.
about a specific God.
Cerberus, hold on. That's the question that started this whole thing was, does a God, or do you believe a God exists in reality or in this world? And that's the question the atheist is going to have to think about and come up with, a justification for what they believe to that question when they're entering the great debate.
Well, the problem from my point of view is that sort of Cerberus is sort of saying, well, there's two questions here. So do you believe in a God? And it's no, you've got a positive position about the non-belief of God. But if you say, do you believe there is no God? And you say no, then you have a positive position about the belief, the existence of God. So it's very strange because they're conflicting positions. So if
Yeah,
you're
but-
asking, okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish.
Yeah, so if you're asking a sort of, we'll call a weak atheist or agnostic, that sort of I don't know position, a lacktheist position, then you're going to ask two questions, both of which entails a belief in your worldview under sort of Cerberus's definition, and are both equally opposed to one another.
And here's trouble.
Yeah, there's trouble. So what I'm doing is I'm specifically asking them about their belief, the general belief of reality. And then I'm going to ask them to justify why the shape of that belief is the shape that it is.
So
Well, but
that could be used for
Right,
anything.
You
That's what
can't
they're
get an
gonna pose.
answer to whether somebody believes in a God on the general shape of reality. Because if you're a physicalist or you're a materialist, the general shape of reality is just going to be, or an empiricist, say, the God belief isn't going to come into your general shape of reality. It's going to be based upon your senses.
well,
But that would be their justification, though. They would just take an empiricist position as to justification.
Hold on,
Like
you're
I said before,
asking
that's an
that-
acceptable justification. I'm just asking for
No,
a
you're,
justification.
I'm not
you're
sure-
asking for a physicalist or I forget the word, a physicalist definition, like to reach your senses about a metaphysical object, and that's not going to occur.
It's a Fabio Andreazzi. La 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 la.
Yeah, Fabio, save us.
Hey,
Hello, Fabio.
hey, I'm
Give
coming
us,
through.
give us your point of view, Fabio, from the outside so far.
No, I mean it's first of all, I don't know if I'm coming through. Is it
Yeah,
okay?
you're doing fine.
Yeah, you're good.
No, it's fantastic. It's 2010 all over again.
I know, right?
It's fucking brilliant, guys. So I mean, on Monday is gonna be my birthday, and you guys made me younger of 10 years. So made me 10 years younger. So thank
happy
you very much.
birthday.
Yeah.
Happy
yeah.
birthday.
No, it's I mean, I don't want to say it's an interesting conversation because it isn't from my point of view. No, I mean really. Okay, so I understand it's something that people is passionate about, and I understand that the first time you hear this kind of back and forth, it's interesting. But there is people around here which have been dealing with that thing for years, and I don't know if it's funny anymore. It's super weird, and to me, the funny thing is that it seems to be that it is a weird semantic misunderstanding for the most part. like for example, so if I were to speak about atheism, the way I think about it, okay, the way I think about it in my culture, in my language, you know, from a continental philosophy point of view, I would be all over the place compared to you guys, because I mean, I will struggle to find some contact point. Not, I mean, some of them would be okay, but you know, it would be really funny. I mean, the old conversation about lacteism, or you know, the funny an atheist with somebody that doesn't believe in something, it's preposterous and ridiculous. Atheism is a positive claim because theism is a claim, and atheism is the negation of the claim. So first of all, in my culture, I'm not saying my worldview, but you know, from where I come from, if you have this kind of conversation, the first thing you have to lay down is, what is your claim? You're a theist. Okay, explain to me your God. And that has nothing to do with the fact that the person believes in the God. That is something which I think there was some misunderstanding back and forth before. Maybe it was just my impression, but there was some confusion between the belief and the claim. So you are atheist towards the claim. You can't be atheist towards the belief, because whatever the people believe, it's their problem. I mean, what are you mental? You know, you don't believe that they ever believe. Well, I mean, it wouldn't make sense, right? So that would be the first step. And then there is another, you know, problem with terms, you know, like agnostic, which you know means a different thing. But you know, but that is beyond the point. But to get to the point that I think Xbox made at the beginning, you know, what the atheists should think about when you know when they get into this kind of conversation. Well, the first thing they should think about is to ask, what is the claim which is, you know, laid down, and then examine if they deny the claim, they accept the claim. You know, that would be it.
Bravo, bravo,
Mille grazie.
bravissimo.
Yeah, that's great. That kind of centered around how I phrased it with, do you believe a God exists, is in reality kind of thing is the question. And then you have your beliefs about it. You before that question, maybe you have no belief in God. Maybe you are like this at that point, which is fine. But when the question comes up about that,
I
you
don't
have a
even know
belief.
what I don't even
You
know
have a
what
belief.
atheist means. So does it mean ignorant?
Yeah,
Okay.
lack not holding a belief in a God.
No. Hold on a second. Lack a belief in a God. So you know what God you lack the belief in.
No, not necessarily.
You
Well,
guys understand
that was my
Yeah.
point. So if it means ignorant, I'm fine with that.
I mean,
But lacteist
it's
is
compatible with ignorant. I mean, really, what it just means is that
Hold
you
on,
don't
guys.
believe that God exists.
No, wait a minute. Igtheism is the lack of belief. Lactheism is the lack of belief.
Right. Yeah, I pointed that out in the chat in
Yeah.
here that I think that a lactheist would be an atheist or theological non-cognitivist because they don't have the concept or of the God, or they don't know what you're meaning when you're talking about this God to form a belief about it.
Well, if you're an igtheist, presumably, I mean, so lactheism will be compatible with igtheism because igtheists will think that the proposition that God exists is meaningless, right? So by their lights,
Right.
they're not going to believe in a meaningless proposition, right? So they won't believe that God exists, right?
Or they haven't been introduced to the proposition is another igtheist position that they just are unaware of it.
Can I chime in for Xbox real quick?
I'm super sure that you know those terms are useful in some contexts. I think that at the point that we are now in the conversation, they're not really that useful. I mean, we're still trying to determine if atheism is a positive claim, it's just a lack of a claim. So I mean, I'm super fine with other terms. Don't get me wrong.
And
I
the thing
don't
that
know what they
bothers
can add
colloquial-
to the
the
conversation.
thing that bothers me about all
colloquial
this, the thing that bothers
and
me
the-
about
Oh,
go
go
ahead,
ahead, yes.
Xbox.
No, you
No,
go
but
ahead now, and
the
I'll
thing
say
that
after
the
you.
thing that drives me fucking crazy about all of this is that the theists who have essentially been forced back, they've been forced back behind the line of like, look at reality, everything in reality, so I can points with an unflinching finger to God. Well, no, not so much. And then they've been forced back beyond the morality line. Without God, you can't possibly be moral. Maybe. Now they've been forced into the fucking realm of philosophy. This is the only realm they have left. And in order to fucking, in my opinion, to keep people from, seeing that which is directly not in front of their face, they've got perfectly decent intellectual human beings arguing about what it actually means to have a belief in or not a belief in, fiddle-diddly-diddle, to dance to the dance of the fucking green shoes.
Welcome to
Meanwhile,
philosophy.
well, but and that's fine and everything. If these philosophical discussions had no serious weight out, like if nobody ever took what they believed straight into a Capitol building and made a law saying something like a woman doesn't have a right to her own body, like that's not a thing. But what I would say to young atheists is, do not be fucking drawn into philosophical debates, because this is not about philosophy. This is about whether you look inside your heart and feel the hand of God there, or if you even believe inside your heart and mind that there's a hand of God. If you don't, you just say no. And if they say, why not? You keep fucking moving.
Well, yeah, that's the point, right? Like, this is if you don't want to enter the great debate and get into debates, then don't worry about the
But a lot of
philosophy
these
of
new
it. It'd
atheists
be
that you're
good
talking
to.
about, but a lot of these new atheists that you're talking about, XV, when they get into these forums, and generally speaking, I'm not talking about formal debates, because a lot of them, when they're getting into formal debates, they have no idea what a formal debate is to begin with. Modern day debates shows us a whole lot of people who've never even been in a formal debate, and you can tell that even beyond their inability to fucking stick two thoughts together, right? But if you're talking about, generally speaking, most people who bump into a theist with a clipboard and a microphone on the street corner, right? Like that.
These are the type of debates I'm talking about, and not formal debates, but running into people online and entering the great debate community. You're going to run into someone that's going to ask you if you believe in God or not, and you're going to, say no, or you're going to try to claim the lack, but you're going to need a reason or a justification for that, and that's when philosophy is going to come in handy. You don't have to know the ins and out of every philosophical stance.
But philosophy isn't going to come in handy, because I have never once heard a philosophical stance that will allow a believer to simply accept that you have a good, reasonable reason not to accept the existence of God, right? And the other problem with that is that they have no problem whatsoever at being dishonest and saying, "Oh well, it doesn't matter what you actually say. My, 10,000-year-old book of, my 2-page leaflet of polemic here says in it that you're actually not being honest. That my God
No, that's a good point.
on your heart."
That's a good point. You will run into that. I just want to put out there for newer atheists
my message
to be prepared to encounter these things.
My message for them, my message
So
for
I
them
think-
is, since
I think
most of them
Gus,
are not interested in being honest in the first place.
I'm
then
really sorry,
just-
Gus. I
just
gotta sort of chime in here. I think
you certainly can, but you're going to discover about me that I'm all about letting people chime in when I'm done talking and not a picosecond before.
But you got to be done talking at some point, please.
I will be done talking at some point, X-Fiend, but
yeah, we'll finish up, and then I really want to sort of say
I
something.
can do that. Thanks for that. Thank you.
Hey, don't make me start having background noise. I'll do it.
At the end of the day, Xbox, I'm not sure what you need to give brand new atheists more than, one, understand your position and be sure that it's coherent, at least to you and to nearest 5 people to you who think like you, and the nearest 5 people to you who maybe don't think like you. 2, keep in mind that these people have lost, the theists have lost on just about every other possible front to convince you. And now they're working in this somewhat murky, somewhat punto and reverso laced system of philosophy, which is the last stand they have. That's
Yeah,
it.
no,
Thank
no,
you very much. Oh, and 3, read the Bible, because most Christians you bump into won't actually.
No, that's a good point. That's exactly the way
Okay.
I'm trying to actually arm new atheists with. And
But
I wanted to add.
but we just had
I'll get right to you, Mark.
But we just had a 45-minute long conversation about,
Hey, Gus,
what
he
is
was
an atheist?
talking.
I know, Gus. I know. I let them go on just because it was an organic conversation and they wanted to have it, and I thought it was good content as well. But what you just said, they do need to be prepared, and that's what I'm trying to get to the points of how to prepare yourself for that. And one of them is to steel man your opponent every chance you get. You don't want to be knocking down the easiest straw man arguments and things like that. That's counterproductive. It's just kind of a stupid endeavor. If you can steel man, make your opponent's argument as strong as it can, and still defeat it, then you actually have something under your belt that you can, in the future that this has no veracity, and you don't have to worry about it.
Okay, so I think basically that Gus, you're kind of making really wide sweeping generalizations about sort of what theists think and what they believe and the written on your heart thing. I mean, I just want to bring up that you're sort of like people on modern day debate have never seen an argument in their lives, and so thanks for that, because that's where I've been on recently. So cheers, mate. And so you're sort of making these really yeah. I'll finish. Thanks. You're really making
don't
these
take a
wide
swing
gen-
unless you
yeah,
want
thanks, Gus. You've had your shirt. Can I please talk?
Gus, the other guy's talking now, Gus.
Don't take a swing unless you want one back. I don't
so
care.
Gus, you're making some wide generalizations about what all Christians believe and that is written on your heart and things like that. And sort of
the Bible.
The idea that you can just sort of walk away and sort of just go, well, I don't believe, I don't have to justify it, I'm just going to walk away. I think it is due to that these people do gain momentum, because they look to somebody like Darth Dawkins, who has this, sort of, I'm going to own all the atheists kind of thing. That's number one. If you don't have sound and valid arguments for people when they come to you and say, hey, why don't you believe in a God? I don't think that really does you much of a service. It just sort of, it just, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying it looks like to a lot of people that you just have a dogmatic assertion in your sort of lack of God belief, or your belief that no God exists. I think the other thing is that philosophy sort of gives you a really good exercise in logically thinking about the world. I think that there's no sort of philosophical discussion, or, I'll amend that. Very few philosophical discussions that's kind of useless, because it does help you think about things. So I kind of have to push back on the whole idea of, well, just ignore the philosophy, because I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, the problem with most philosophy is that it has an attachment to something, which in turn has an attachment, even if it's a removed attachment, to the real world. Okay? So this God, right, which I don't know if any human being in the last 500 years can honestly say, in any way that can be proven by anything but their own story, has ever appealed to any of the 5 senses, has healed a cripple, has fixed that whole problem of you can't put wooden ships into the sea past a certain length, or the sea destroys them. Little things like that, which when they use for facts to back up their so-called philosophy, it's not actual philosophy. The philosophy is the tactics. The so-called facts they use to back up the philosophy is the Bible. A 2-page leaflet, basically full of a whole bunch of
Here, but you're targeting Christians, Gus. Like like you are going to mostly encounter Christians, but most of the Christians that you encounter are not going to argue for the Christian God. They're going to want you to start with a generic God and then tag you down to a Christian God if you even get that far.
Yeah, that's another aspect of
That-
their dishonesty, because everybody knows they're
yeah.
actually talking about a Christian God.
That's why I stressed out the fact that you got to start from the claim. I mean, I can't possibly have a conversation with somebody unless I know what the hell they're claiming, you know. So th- this is really important. And you know, another thing. I'm sorry, Mark has left. I think that one of the problems here is not philosophy per se. Is the fact that in those conversations, philosophy is used as a weapon, and and that's why, you know, 9 conversation out of, well, I would say 99 conversation out of 100, they just lead to nothing. You know, everybody still has got the same idea, and I mean, if you're lucky, nobody is getting screamed at. You know,
Yeah, they'll
but
cherry
that's
pick
it.
the
Yeah,
they'll
but
cherry pick a philosophical stance, right?
yeah,
And
but
target
there
you
is
with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
but there is one thing you said, Xbox, which I don't agree, or I mean, I've got, uh, I'm not
How
really
do you kick,
100% behind
Simos? How do
it.
you kick, Fabio?
Sorry, say what?
I was trying to figure out how to kick you.
Oh, okay.
No.
Yes, Sam must not do that.
Good.
No, it's when
Huh?
you were
Huh?
it, it's when you were talking about the arguments, you know, and it's important, you know, to have the arguments, and you know, and all the stuff when you talk. I mean, arguments are important, but what really drives people are convincing arguments, and that might be subtle, but it's important, because
hmm
a convincing argument doesn't necessarily have to be a good argument. I mean, some of them are not even arguments. I mean, there's some people who just convinced about, you know, what they claim for, you know, very good argument, but they're convincing to them. And this is why it gets really, really hard, you know. So if we have a conversation on the general state, I mean, an atheist talking with the theist, and all that stuff, it's okay. The problem comes when they're trying to convince each other. That is gonna be tough, because everybody is trying to attack the argument, proving that the argument is not, either it's not good or it's faulty
hmm
or all the thing. None of it is probably going to convince the other person to leave the argument, because it is still convincing to them.
Right. Yeah. No, and
Yeah,
I agree with that.
if I could,
And
if I could
the
say,
next
just
step I would take would be um, criticizing. Don't be afraid to criticize other atheists when they do make mistakes in arguments or mistakes in logic. That that shouldn't be like a taboo thing,
Hmm.
as it's like, what's the phrase, steel sharpening steel, or whatever it is.
Steel sharpens
Yeah.
steel, but I don't know. I
What's
mean,
that, Gus?
Well, weed out the weak arguments for sure.
yeah,
But
Right.
look, I just need to say a couple of things, if I may, quickly, which is to say, there are deductive arguments for atheism, right? Divine hiddenness, Tang. You know, are they convincing? Like Fabio was saying, well, that's completely dependent upon your point of view, and also
Right.
probably your metaphysical, you know, definitions that you use for truth and knowledge, and
Yep.
you know, several other philosophical questions which need to be raised in order to even have an argument in the first place.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they are there, the deductive ones.
Yeah,
Also,
you're going to run
the
into
more
holes on both sides
sure, also
with the
also
arguments. So.
yeah, sure. Also, there's going to be there are inductive arguments for atheism, more I would say, and probably better ones, because of epistemology. But you know,
hmm
these things, they are out there, but you do have to research them and to run
Yeah.
them against somebody who knows philosophically what they're talking about is not the easiest thing. And then obviously, when it comes down to it, Fabio's point is these are just claims that are going to be made.
Right.
Ultimately, they're going to be reduced to claims. and
Mhm.
therefore, it depends upon your worldview, in inverted commas, if there is such a thing, and also it depends upon your presuppositions, as more importantly, as we would say. So I think those things are the things that make you a strong atheist. And you have to study them. You're not just going to come out and go, "Oh yeah, I've got every answer in the world to every question a theist is going to ask." And having that charity is the important part early on, and the humility to change your mind in real time in the middle of an argument if you think somebody has said something which is correct.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but
And
you're
if
right. I mean, but I guess a lot depends on the context of the conversation, you know. So if it's argument versus argument, cool, I'm fine, you know. I can even concede some argument. I can find some good theistic arguments and still not be convinced by that, right? There is nothing wrong with that. So if the context is, you know, argument versus argument, it's super fine. The my beef is that most of these conversations that I mean, at least most of the conversations that I see, there is somebody which is trying to convince somebody else to switch position, and you will never get
Mhm.
there with a better argument than the one that you have, you know.
Yeah, agreed.
Nobody is going to crumble, you know, on the weight of a superior argument to the one that they have, at least not immediately. So
Yeah.
it's really fun. I mean, to me, that is the funny part, you know. There is this uh it's like a schizophrenic conversation most of the time, of people talking and not really realizing uh what is the goal that they're trying to achieve, you know. What is that they actually talking about.
Okay, a couple of things. I'm just going to redirect again, if I may, Xbox. Sorry. A question that was asked earlier, which I think I'd like an
Yeah.
answer to,
Please.
was
Please.
do you have to have a reason why you disbelieve in every god? Right. That was kind of a Geo Sam question, which I thought was interesting, and one which maybe new atheists or people who are fresh to atheism, recently converted, etc., or deconverted, I should say,
Mhm.
might want an answer to. And that's the thing. And then the second point I'd just like to also is to welcome Epi back to the panel. Thank you so much for joining us, Epi.
Not a problem. Glad to be here.
Hey, hey, hey.
Excellent. Good to have you here. Okay, so that
Yeah.
question, do you need a justification for disbelieving in every god?
Right. Yeah. So, like, are you gonna need one to knock down every god, like you're at a carnival, like throwing the baseball at the milk bottles? Like, are you gonna have to do that with every single god concept, or
I'd
or are you just gonna do it broadly and just
Yeah.
wipe them all out with a broad claim?
Yeah,
so
I would recommend you try
Yeah.
to, and you can't. I mean, having a specific one for
Go
each of them
Piper.
is just not doable. So abroad is always a good way to go. Like, never seen one, knocks all of them down. Just
well, so I don't think, you know, the way to do it is, you know, engineer like one argument for each god or whatever. I mean, I think it's sort of obvious that you know, if you're going to amazing. I got like a lot of noise around my house. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Go
there's
Piper comes
broad.
back.
I think you were saying that there's broad categories by which there are arguments against God's existence, but I think this is the particularly fascinating area myself, because when we talk about being a strong atheist, it seems to be that we are calling the proposition "Does God exist?" false. And when you plug in an unfalsifiable definition of God, how can you even do that? It
Well,
seems
you
to me the
can't.
position of strong atheism seems to be a little
You can't.
ridiculous under those circumstances.
No thinking human being with the current technology we have is going to be able to definitively state that there is no God. I mean, any honest person will come up with that.
So,
see, I would disagree. Oh yeah, go ahead, Piper.
Yeah, sorry. The minute I started talking, a bunch of people started like deciding that they needed to scream like 5 feet away from me. Anyway, so no, but so the point I was making was that I don't, it's the way you sort of go about addressing these like global claims, like whether there are any, or global questions, like whether there are any gods or not, right? You're not going to sort of design an argument for each and every god that you could possibly consider. What you're going to do is you're going to come up with some general principles about how you think of the question, right? General principles for going about answering the question, and then comparing, sort of a wide set of concepts to those principles. So, you sort of decide, what's the basic kind of criteria for something to be a god, right? And then I compare that basic criteria to sort of my general principles for deciding what kind of things is it reasonable to say exist or don't exist, right? And that's how I think you answer the question. You don't come up with like, a specifically engineered argument for each and every possible god, right?
Well, the way that I answered Gio was to say, no, you don't have to justify your belief at all. I mean, if the question is whether or not you have a belief, once you say no, you've answered the question. You don't have to go any further. But if you choose to try to defend a position, you can say, well, none that I've analyzed. Go ahead and give me your case for a god or whichever god you're claiming, and then I'll go ahead and consider it. And then just honestly consider it and point out the problems that you see.
Which will get pushback on that when you claim, well, all the gods that I've been presented don't make sense, or they don't convince me that they exist.
Mm-hmm.
Is you'll be separated into this category by the theist as being a local atheist rather than a global atheist, which claims no gods exist. And I don't know how that sits with you, but
yeah, I've got no problem with it.
So, I think it would be silly to this is just my opinion, to try and knock down every single god beforehand, because there's an infinite amount of gods that can be conceived of. The future holds many more that we don't know about, and you couldn't disprove them all in your lifetime if you try it. There's just too many.
I mean, you could just come up with a general worldview that does rule them out. So, for example, there are philosophers who defend a metaphysical sort of naturalism, and they give positive arguments for it. And if you have positive arguments for an atheistic metaphysic, that is, an atheistic view of how existence is, then you've kind of ruled out gods this way. So, for example, many would appeal to a lot of things that are better predicted, assuming naturalism. For example, the success of modern physics and sciences, that's better presupposed. Another kind of proof somebody could use is simplicity. If you only have if you have good reasons and evidence to believe in material objects rather than immaterially causally interacting objects, well, then the simpler thesis, a la Occam's razor, should win out, or having a naturalistic worldview better unifies all your knowledge, because then you don't have to have like two sorts of knowledge, one for gods and other supernatural entities, and then the sort of naturalistic knowledge. You could say naturalism is more coherent overall. It's less ad hoc. So You could just point out these theoretical virtues, and the theist can just do likewise and say their model has better theoretical virtues, and just do it that way. Just argue it over which model of reality just holds these theoretical virtues and assess them on a side-by-side basis. That doesn't seem to me to be totally outlandish.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of answer someone in the chat there that said they had never been presented with a god, and I believe them. They've never. It's a concept that they get talking about from your point of view, anyway.
Oh,
it's always going to be a concept of a god that acts
Lucky,
this
come
way
find
or
me later.
is this way, or
I mean, human beings think conceptually, so that's not really a surprise. For example, I think Simos and I once had a discussion where he told me, like in modern physics, and Simos, correct me if I'm wrong here, matter, like an atom is defined as a infinitely small substance or something along those lines. It's defined
particle.
very... I'm sorry?
A particle, not an atom, but yes.
Oh, particle. Yeah, it's described in a very abstract way that, like, because of my limits of sense, I can't really observe, but it's just hypothesized in the best current model of physics, and we just take it as a given because of all its explanatory power. So we kind of conceptualize it first, put it as a part of our working theory of physics, and then because that's the one that best wins out overall in terms of explanation, empirical accuracy, consistency, coherence, ability to make predictions, things like this, that's one we're kind of justified in believing in, even though we have like no direct sensory interaction with it.
Yeah, that's a really good point I would like to mention as well, which is modern day empiricism is not the naive empiricism of the 18th century.
Right.
So for me, empiricism doesn't just include data that comes in through your senses. It also includes the models which we use to explain that data. Mm-hmm. So such things as mathematics and theories, in general, algebra, etc. Exactly. All of the things which are consistent with the modern scientific method are included in empiricism, as far as I'm concerned.
So yeah, I mean, hypothetically, if God was hypothetically, God can be considered, could be ruled out or included in our understanding of reality in the same way any unobservable entity is, just because God would make really good empirical predictions, or positing God would make better sense of the coherence of our worldview or consistency or lack thereof, or the lack thereof would actually prove better. So atheists and theists could just conduct the argument in that way. And in fact, you have theists like Richard Swinburne, who does argue for God on those bases. And you have atheists like Paul Draper, who really likes Swinburne's methodology, but tries to show that, no, actually, it proves the opposite.
Yeah. Piper, you were about to say something.
Oh, no, I was just going to say the way you were describing contemporary empiricism makes it sound like a sort of Quinian empiricism as opposed to like a Humean empiricism or something like that.
Yeah, I would probably agree. Yeah, I don't think Hume got it exactly right.
Yeah.
Or more to the point, Berkeley. But anyway.
Yeah.
There's a book I've been meaning to read. It was heavily suggested to me by a Catholic YouTuber. He goes by Kane B. It's called The Empirical Stance, and it's written by a philosopher, Bas van Fraassen, and he says that empiricism is less of a set of beliefs and more like a stance or an attitude. Like you have a kind of a high attitude for the sciences, the ability of making predictions. You have kind of a skeptical look towards metaphysics, to just a lot of discourses that mainly rely on unobservable entities or just plain arguments. Things of this nature. and people can have those sorts of attitudes to specific degrees, but it's these like personal attitudes that characterize one as an empiricist, rather than just saying, it's whether you believe everything just reduces down to sense data.
Brojo, that's Epi. Maximus, as we also used to call him back in the day.
Yeah, I was I was hoping Gus would realize it, just so I could say hi.
Damn it! Hopefully he'll be back next week. So I'll make sure that happens next week.
Yeah, and I hope the
Pass it over to
engagement's
you
still
again.
going well.
I think that the one of the interesting things about talking about gods as general concepts is that we can actually have interesting conversations like the one we had in the last 20 minutes with Epi. By the way, ciao Epi, and Simos,
Yeah.
Because and it's mostly because I think this is just my opinion, when we're talking about general concepts, we're just talking about trying to figure out, by inserting either a god or not a god, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it is not a god which hinges on my life. So that is the big difference. If I'm talking with somebody which is I don't know, like a real strict Muslim or a real strict Christian or whatever, the concept of the God that we're talking about is something that actually, if I were to believe into that, my life would be changed. I will have to make serious changes in my life, And so you can see where the attrition starts forming, and starts beginning, and the conversation gets all of a sudden really, really, really difficult. The good thing about the concepts is the one that we just saw. We can have that kind of conversation, knowing that. I mean, I can grant that God, easily, not a problem. I can also say, I can grant you that God. It doesn't really care, it doesn't really matter to me, So go for it,
Well, like
I think Fabio,
let's
I think
call
you
him
have,
Robert, and carry on. But
I think that's actually a fairly good point, because this kind of introduces in any kind of worldview like a notion of auxiliary hypotheses. It's one thing to say there exists a God, but then to say, by the way, this God interacted and brought together the peoples of Israel, and he became incarnated into a man, and and he died on the cross for your sin. Like, the more you add on, the more you kind of have to back it up. And this is where you kind of get into not just defending theism, but also you have to build the case on top of that of the resurrection, for example.
There is a plethora, of things that they just pop up all of a sudden, and you're just surrounded and say, okay, let's pick one, But I agree with you, and that's why. And again, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself. It is super. The first thing to do, it is super important, is to state the claim that you want me to believe in. Say the claim, because the conversation is way different, because of the reasons that Epicurus just said. If he stated the claim of that particular God, I can start a conversation from many points. If it's I would say, just not to disparage it, but just to make myself clear. But if it's just a concept of a God like the one that Simos and Epicurus were talking about before, okay, we got to go to another different approach.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that's. I wanted to point this out. Hold on.
Go ahead.
I wanted to point this out that because that was one of the highlights on what I had to talk about tonight. Was if you're gonna say Christian, Muslim, whoever, there's a difference between arguing the scriptures with them versus arguing their God. And if you're into arguing scriptures, I mean, by all means, argue scriptures with them. I leave that up to them because that's their religion. So there's a difference between arguing the
well,
religion points versus
yes
their
and no.
concept of a god.
Well,
Yeah, I know. I
Xbox.
got pushback on this the other day. So
Yeah,
pushback.
I mean, so if you talk with somebody which is a Bible literalist, well, first of all, you gotta ask him which Bible. Okay, so which is an important point. But if it's a literalist, I think you could talk with him about the Bible. If it's a Catholic, for example, that's gonna be way, way, way harder.
Right,
Because
because their traditions
you
and
can't talk about the scriptures only. You only have to talk about the doctrine, and that is something that you really have to be into.
but
It's
where do you get
yeah.
when you argue the scriptures and I disprove that the Bible that still the Christian God may still exist.
Well, but this okay. So hold on a second. Again, context. If you're talking with a literalist, a Bible literalist, okay, and you can have a conversation on the Bible, and according to him, if I follow by the letter, you find something which is it doesn't make any sense or whatever. I think that is a fair and interesting approach. Again, we
Oh
got
no,
to
I agree
remember
that if you
we
want to
got to
get into
remember
the
what we said
yeah,
before. If you try to convince the guy, you're all over the place. It doesn't work. But that is a
hmm
good line of conversation. But if you're talking with a Catholic and you try to go with the same route with a Bible literalist, you're not going anywhere, because it doesn't
yeah.
work like that.
That's why I say it depends on your goal, your objective, right?
Depends on the
Yeah.
claim. Again,
Right.
it's the
Yes,
claim.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just trying to point out
Yeah.
another angle that someone can take without having to get into the scriptures. They
Hmm.
can if they want. I have no problem with them getting into it. Just like I compare it to like science and getting into the DNA and if we were created by some intelligence or if we evolved. Those things, if you like that subject, get into that subject with them and point out their flaws. And if you don't, grant them that okay, some intelligence created us. What's the next step to get us to a god? And you'll still never get there.
What's yeah, I mean, so one thing to consider though is you can still make empirical claims about specific religions though. So for example, or even against them. So for example, there's this interesting argument called there are interesting arguments made that religion or particular religions either make you a morally better person or a morally worse person. If it's
Yes.
if it's the case that you become a morally worse person, and it can be well established by social sciences, now
Mhm.
that seems to be a knock on what we would predict if such a religion was true. But on the other hand, if it actually makes you a better person overall, then that seems to be kind of an argument in favor of that religion. So if it
Yeah.
was so if it was the case that I don't know American Christians donate more per capita and give an income than American atheists, it could be the case that you would have some sort of evidence that Christianity was true. But on the other hand, if the opposite was true, that would mean that that's a really good point for atheism.
Yeah.
The only objection someone might cast
Mhm.
at either result is, well, maybe it's the fact that it's less about being an atheist and more about being an American atheist or an American Christian or something
Right.
like that.
Right.
Yeah,
No,
and
no, but
morality is
I agree with
a
you.
good point.
Yeah.
Morality is a good point. It's a deep subject to get into. So I warn any new atheists to study up on philosophy, just in the moral area, if you're going to get into that, because it's thick, and it's probably where the best arguments or persuasion can come from.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean,
I will have to think about it because I
there's
mean
Sure, sure.
I think it's easier to convince somebody that a God exists rather than to convince somebody that his moral system is fucked up.
Oh no, I didn't mean
Yeah.
it that way.
Well, I mean, you would but you will have to get there. If you go with the moral route, in the conversation, you eventually will have to end up, like what Epicurus said before, well, one of the, it might be the case that one morality is superior to the other one. Ergo, if you're not in the morally superior one, your morality is bad, or it's not as good. And again, I think it's easier to convince somebody that God exists rather than to convince him that his moral system is not the best ever which has ever existed.
That's why I said it's so
that actually
thick.
leads into a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because another thing to consider is abortion evil or is it good? If it's
Fuck
good,
me.
no, I'm not going to comment on it.
No, I know. Yeah, I mean, you just picked a non-controversial topic, like at all. Yeah, carry on.
No, it does relate. It does relate. I promise. So, if you're somebody who believes that abortion is a good thing and a woman has a right to her body and to access abortion, well, atheists basically support that in spades. Like they agree with the pro-choice side of things. However, and Christians don't, which is kind of a sign that, oh, if this is true, Christianity is morally limiting women. But if abortion is actually something to consider evil and the pro-life side is correct, then this is a huge moral lapse that atheists seem to be committing, that Christians seem to be avoiding in spades, and even going to the more laudable direction. So
I'm not sure.
If you have
go ahead, Piper.
So if you have one, so if you already have one particular view on the matter, and you're solidly convinced of it, then you're going to read who exactly is acting as the moral party in that case, and who actually is bearing better moral fruits.
I'm not sure that there's anything real. I mean, in terms of like whether you want to be an atheist or a Christian, I'm not sure that like anything turns on the abortion issue in particular, because like, I mean, like,
well, that could
so,
be put the other way. That could be put the other way, Piper. There's nothing about being an atheist that tells you about the abortion issue.
Right. I mean, yeah, the point that I'm sort of wanting to make here is that, like, having, whatever position on abortion is consistent with either being a Christian or being an atheist. I mean, there are lots of, I mean, maybe it's comparatively rare, but there are lots of conservative atheists who think, abortion is wrong, right? And there also are lots of Christians who think that, abortion isn't wrong. I mean, actually, in the United States, the proportion, like the biggest demographic for abortions is Catholic women. So,
all right, that's not my right. But I'm not saying. Well, but my point isn't, abortion is compatible or incompatible with atheism or Christianity, but rather, what would we expect? But rather, if a particular religion,
you're making it evidential,
better moral. If we say a particular religion guarantees a better moral output, then you're going to already have to have what's considered to be moral or immoral picked out.
No, again, Epi, that is a very interesting angle, and that is something which, I think it will bear really interesting conversation. My only objection would be that I think that it would be almost, I would say almost impossible. I really want to say impossible, but I'll grant you the almost impossible for anybody to find a position on, forget abortion, pick anything else, okay? Personal freedom, death penalty, whatever, that you can make a really clear dichotomy between, okay, this is that, even it's I'm not even going to say that is a Christian position and that isn't. That is a position that everybody of that particular, brand of Christianity, adhere to, and everybody else no. I think it would be really, really, really hard. And so, you see, it might be super difficult to get to the point that you were explaining, which again, it would be a fantastic point. I don't think we can start, the starting point is really difficult to find.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was saying about morality being so thick that you have to really understand a lot of positions to get into even start talking about it intelligently. And
Yeah.
it's a deep topic. I wouldn't suggest, excuse me, newer atheists like jumping into those type of arguments unless they've actually really studied up on it and kind of looked at the positions and looked at the opposing positions as well. That's one piece of advice I'll throw out there. If nothing tonight is when you look at a philosophical position or you have a philosophical position, look at other ones that have opposing views to it, and take those in as well. Like soak those in. Doesn't mean your position is wrong, but know that there are positions that will oppose it, and know how they oppose it. Let's see. Another one is um, know your logical fallacies. Right? Get well versed in um, formal and informal fallacies if you're going to actually argue with someone, whether you're arguing with another atheist or with a Christian, doesn't matter. You want to be able to spot those and not just fall prey to those in arguments or discussions. Like me personally, I don't do debates. I'll do discussions, but
I don't know, Xbox. I think you're flying a little bit too high. I mean, again, I might be,
an asshole.
I might be a cynical, an asshole, a cynical bastard. But again, uh, I think that a better suggestion, to people engaging in this kind of conversation would be, shut the fuck up and listen. First of all, do not be afraid to say, I don't know.
Yep.
And don't be a dick.
Yep.
And I think we are
Good advice.
not there. We are not there yet, generally speaking. And I mean, there are exceptions. I can say that in all these years that I've had this kind of conversation with Epi, for example, which is here. I don't think we ever had a violent disagreement or something, or just shout at each other or something like that. I mean, we've disagreed, of course we did, but I think he's a nice guy. He's a nice dude. I love talking with him, and that's it. And we have been most of the time on what people would call the opposite fence, the opposite side of the barricades.
Yeah, I think there's something. I mean, this is another little bugbear of mine, if I may just get in there.
Please.
Look, it's like this. If you're going to be in a debate community, you are literally, by definition, talking to people who you disagree with. If you have a problem disagreeing with people, right, that's your problem. Right? That's a problem that you've created. Okay, don't be in a debate community if you can't handle disagreement.
Yes.
All right. It's just pointless because it's not a debate community. That's an echo chamber, right? And the point about this community, as far as I'm concerned, and there are many communities that are surrounding it that this need not apply to, but in the theist atheist community, or the great debate community, as it was once called by Agent of Doubt, look, we are always going to disagree.
Hold on, Simos. Who did you say coined that phrase?
I think it was Agent of Doubt, was it?
Agent of Doubt.
It wasn't Steve McRae?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up the name that shall not be mentioned.
Oh, so
okay?
I didn't mean to bring up Steve McRae.
It's the only thing
Maybe
you said.
later we'll have
hang
our
on.
yearly debate on are all babies atheists, just for fun.
I sent him a join in link, but
yeah, okay. Well, then there may be some issues there, but not to. He's always welcome. Anybody's welcome because we're not an echo chamber and we can disagree. That's the point.
We're not an echo chamber,
and
we
that's
can
what makes
disagree.
it fun. And
Right.
so when
That's what makes it
Fabio
fun.
says, "Don't be a dick,"
Fabio says, "Don't be a dick."
then that's what he's referring to. He's referring to saying, look, there are people we disagree with. I disagree with Effie. We have many great conversations. I fondly think of him as a friend, even though we're on a different side of the argument, right? Because that's not what's important, right? That's the disagreement bit is not the important bit. That just makes a stronger community if you can handle it, right?
Right. Don't let people in the middle of an argument get you frustrated and emotional and throw a red herring out for you that you go down some rabbit trail rather than dealing what you originally were discussing and disagreeing about. And if you can possibly, like, don't get emotional invested in it. Because think the whole time that there's a possibility you could be wrong.
Well, it's more than that. There might also be the day where you have a really bad day and you just behaving like a bloody moron. But but I mean, come back and go to the person and say, listen, I was being a dick. Okay, so yeah, I'm sorry about that, and that's it. And you will find. I mean, people is willing to give a lot of leeway to people if they don't act like they are the anointed by the gods or whatever, and the best gift to humanity ever. Which is another thing which I find really hilarious. I mean, there are some people in this environment that they really think that they are the shit, and if they leave, the conversation is gonna die off because that's what they are the ones keeping it alive, and they got the best argument. And if they're gone, everything goes to shambles. That is super amusing. It's super.
Yeah. Okay. So this is also something which you've just brought up there, which is to say that as far as new people into the community, there are people that will be disingenuous when they argue with you. There will be people that are literally just straw man generators. Straw man is when somebody misinterprets your argument in such a way as to make it easier to knock down. And it's incredibly frustrating to talk to somebody who continually straw mans. But nonetheless, if you find that happening, then you've got two options. You can call them out for it and say, that isn't what I said, and correct them. And if they continue to do it, then that is pretty much the end of the conversation. You can say, well, we agreed to disagree. Thank you very much for the conversation. And try not to talk to them again.
Can I add one thing to what you just said?
Go for it. Sorry.
Real quick. I would always suggest calling them out, but never correct them. Make them tell you what you said and ask them to explain how they got from what you said to what they said.
I like that.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Oh,
Go
there's
ahead,
also
that's one of the red herrings that I mentioned. Don't try to fall into the red herring parts.
Yeah, I think Epi wanted to chime in before I did. So
I don't.
Oh, actually, no. I was going to point to somebody I knew when I was on Twitter. I used to see there's a guy I followed. He was an Anglican who sometimes would engage in atheists or have atheists engage with him, and he just asked, before we continue this discussion, could you just give the best possible defense you can of my own position, or at the very least, or and if he wasn't really satisfied that the other person was being charitable, then he would just save them both the time and just stop the conversation. But to his
Right.
credit, I've seen him say, "Yeah, that's actually a pretty good idea of what I'm getting at here," and then they would just proceed. I've seen that a couple of times too.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned the steel man earlier about steel manning other people's position. That would be the opposite of a straw man of what Simos was saying. You want to make their argument the strongest it possibly can,
Yeah.
because anything in between, it's not worthwhile going after. I mean, you want to knock down the strongest version you can, and if you can't, then back to the drawing board kind of thing. Like,
There is also another thing I want to say. Just because we're giving generous suggestions, and I think they're based on our own experience, on what we went through all these years. I am not aware, and maybe there's some expert which can explain it to me, but I'm not aware of any terminal disease which forces you to engage with everybody on every topic. I'm not personally aware of that. What I mean to say is that you don't need to. If the person that you're talking to is saying something that you think is deeply stupid, like profoundly stupid. There was a dude saying that the 7 days is proof that God exists. I'm just
yeah, Jesse.
yeah. I mean, okay, this is just in. I understand. You don't need to talk with that guy. You can avoid the conversation altogether.
I know that guy.
Yeah. And that
That-
is just the first thing problem of mine. I mean, there is a lot of them.
No, it's a good
a lot,
example. Jesse's one that you don't want to
But,
engage with.
I mean, yeah, you don't need to engage with somebody, especially if you really think that what he's saying is really, really, really stupid.
Yeah. Don't
Don't
stoop.
let stupidity
Don't
draw
stoop
you
in an
in.
argument. Just right over the top. So that's also good advice. Although, I mean, there are many different levels of somebody that's coming to atheism, right? Quite often they're getting there, and this is something I'd like to maybe open up for a quick part of the discussion. Maybe they're getting there because they've reasoned their way out of the indoctrination. And I'm generalizing here. This isn't going to be the same for everybody. But maybe some have reasoned their way out of the indoctrination. A lot of people say it's because they read the Bible, for instance, and they realized there were, contradictions or things which were morally repugnant in there. And they reasoned their way to a position of either non-belief or agnosticism or atheism. And in which case, they're already starting to hone their reasoned skills, because that's what we've been talking about, right? We've been talking about the use of reason, logic, and we've bracketed that into roughly philosophy. And so, I think there is something to be said for recognizing that that's the process that's going on, and then encouraging that process and continuing that process even when you get to the state of disbelief, for instance.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to chime in one last time, and then I'm going to leave. All the things that we said right now, especially the last part, the shut up and listen, don't be a dick, don't engage in stupid arguments. I want to stress out that applies to both sides. Okay. I think it's an important point to make, because I know that when we say these people, there are some examples which pops up, some people which pop up, and people which don't believe what we believe. I'm pretty sure that they have another set of examples, another set of people that applies to both of us. Okay, applies to everybody. So I just want to point that out. Having said that, ciao. Ciao, Epi. It's been a
Ciao.
pleasure talking to you again, man.
Yeah.
Bella.
Hasta luego.
Ciao.
Arrivederci.
Ciao.
All right. Constantly mixing up my Spanish with my Italian.
Porque.
Yeah, no problem. What did you think of that kind of last little section, Epi, from your perspective?
I mean, I think sometimes debates can be entrenched, but I think that positions where you just heavily tie your way of life to are usually just going to be pretty hard to leave or to take up in general. I think that's just why people generally become entrenched in the position they have with some migration.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, if Otangelo, if you're out there, if you want to join, the link is at the top, and we'd also like to hear your viewpoint on this particular subject about the state of the debate community.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah,
hit all
okay.
the highlights that I had. We didn't get deep into all of them, but I think we touched on all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only one we didn't touch on was like the hill you want to die on. Like if you get into an argument or a discussion with someone, and Fabio kind of alluded to it, think about, is that the hill you really want to die on? Like, is this the argument you really want to get into? Does it really matter? Do you want to waste your brain power on that?
I mean, yeah, you see, because I think both of the one of the things that attracted me to the debate community, as it were, was the chance to stretch the grey matter, was the chance to get through some of the logic and reason and philosophy, and I think that's been a real boon in my life towards the way I've thought, critical thinking, etc. And this is for both sides as well. I think, one of the things I realized when I met Epi, good example here, who's somebody who's very knowledgeable about, philosophy and early church fathers and the etc. The arguments for and against, was that there was a lot to learn, and it seemed intimidating, but actually, when you get into the discussions, it's kind of really quite interesting if you're talking to somebody who is generous, because that does give you the ability to stretch what you currently know and to learn new ways of thinking about things, especially for
Absolutely.
the
It's
philosophy.
helped my critical thinking skills so much. I'm having to learn them back, but I mean, it's helped so much with the way I think and what I think and how I think.
I got a whole list of things I could suggest, but there's one thing I suggest more than anything else, and that is don't engage in an argument or a debate that's going to upset you.
Yeah.
This is true.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I have definitely failed to live up to that advice, but it's true.
Oh, we all don't rise above the fray, or like I've trolled sometimes and things like that, and that's not really in my nature. So I've had fun just for the sake of it.
Well, if you get mad, your IQ instantly drops.
Sure,
you're not doing anything good.
That is so true.
Definitely good advice. One of the problems I find is that when you're engaged in, what seems like a productive conversation with somebody that's being charitable, etc., etc., and then it changes, and they don't tell you that they've changed their position, and they're now going to just straw man and denigrate the position, etc., etc. And that because like the arguments get to a natural point where you're just going to go round again. So that's another thing to look out for. When you think you're saying the same thing like twice, right? You just don't say it the third time, because know that the argument has finished, or at least the conversation has finished, and then to back out of it. I had exactly that problem with Ultimated Judeo-Christian, where I got to the third time of saying it and went, look, I'm saying this for the third time, so I think we're finished with our conversation now. Thank you so much, and I'll repeat it this last time. And I think that really helps to try and be aware that if you've corrected somebody on the straw man that they're making, because you're defending atheism, for instance, then just finish the conversation politely and back out as quick as possible. And
Yeah.
both sides. This is my common experience.
Mhm.
Is both sides think they've won in most debates. Right?
Right.
Most people go
Absolutely.
away completely unchanged in their position. So one of the motivations for having a debate, in some sense, is not necessarily to change the person that you're talking to's mind, but to give people the chance that are listening to reflect on both sides, and they may change their position or not, as the case may be.
I also sometimes after discussions you might even even if sometimes in your discussions you might actually just come away with your position, but it's just a better informed position overall. Like if somebody goes from being if somebody goes, I don't know, from being a young earth creationist, has a lot of discussions on evolution and science, but still at the end of the day is an old earth creationist, I mean, he at least has a stronger position overall. Or if an atheist has a lot of discussions on philosophy, has a very simplistic, I'm just gonna borrow all my worldview from science, but he gets a few more philosophical insights and just doesn't take a basic scientific view. I think at the end of the day, both people have come away with a more defensible position.
Yeah, and I wish Piper hadn't just dropped, but I found that I try to surround myself with people that I view more intelligent than me, and I just listen for the most part, and get references for books to read, things like that.
Yeah.
But just listening to them have discussions.
Just being
you
humble about
pick
where
up a
you
lot.
learn, humble about where you learn from as well. You can learn from anybody. Somebody might say something that makes you just go, "Oh yeah," and then you're thinking about a certain thing, and that's the improvement. I've learned a lot from the opposing side. Even people who I absolutely detest, right, have corrected me, and I've been humble enough, fortunately, to go, "Oh yeah, you are right about that. Okay, I won't make that mistake again." Anyway, look, we're going to come to the end here, so I'd like to just go around the panel, if I may, and get a conclusion or thoughts, or what we're doing in the Great Beard community, or what advice you may give. So I'd like to start with Headless, if I may. Headless.
What kind of advice?
Yeah, what would you give to new atheists,
don't be a
bearing in
dick.
mind they're probably coming from, some kind of religious belief?
Yeah, don't be a dick. Just because you discovered this, there's people out there who've been doing a lot longer. And you're just going to run around repeating stuff that everybody already knows.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Perfect. Piper, what do you think of what's been going on in the Hangout? What's your conclusions? And what advice would you give to somebody who is a new atheist?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a good discussion. Interesting things were said all around. Quality people. I guess for the advice, I think atheists should avoid thinking that religious people are sort of intellectually inferior to them, or are just irrational in some way. I think, there's this idea that I think even sophisticated atheists have, which is that, the reason that religion continues is because, people are just really bad at sort of rational thinking. And, I think that's wrong. I mean, and I think one of the ways in which that thesis blows up in the face of some atheists is, they'll meet a theist who has a better handle on the sort of case they want to make for their position than the atheist in question does, and so they end up in for a rude awakening. When you think religious people are sort of only religious because they're irrational, and then they end up, sort of bulldozing you in a debate or discussion or whatever. So I think that's my advice. Sort of, even and I think religious doctrines are false. So this is not me defending them, but I would say avoid thinking that religious people are sort of intellectually inferior to you or just religious because they're irrational.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely, really important. Both sides are rational. It's not irrational to be a believer, and to accept that straight from the outset is a good thing. And then to combat it on that basis rather than trying to just demean somebody by virtually name calling or ad hominem, whatever. So yeah, thank you, Piper. That's really good. Hillary's.
I would say to verify your facts before you're making assertions, and to remain humble and willing to learn.
Concise as always. Yeah. Do your research. Yeah, really, really useful advice there. And I think we've all been caught short on that one before. So thank you. Yes, Hillary, but to the point. Epi?
Two things. One, if you're somebody who wants to be willing to engage in a discussion, try engaging in steelmans. In fact, if you can be the kind of person who can debate a position you disagree with, that's actually a pretty good sign of actual intellectual rigor. And the second thing bit of advice I'll give is this: don't engage in debates on the internet before you clean your room.
Okay, Epi, you stole that from me.
Yeah, but you didn't say it, so I thought
I know, but I'm going to have to ask you now, is your bed made?
Good advice. Good advice.
It is not.
Okay, then you have to log out right now. Okay. Scoot.
Okay.
Scoot.
And serve, finally.
I'm going to suggest find someone on the opposite end of your position that has the respect of the people on your position. Make friends with them and beat your head against that wall until you know what you're doing.
Yeah, test your arguments first with somebody that isn't going to just mock you for your lack of knowledge or whatever, because this is a learning process, right?
Yeah, don't be rude to that guy. Like I said, make friends with him.
Yeah.
Okay. And Xbox.
There's not a lot more than I can say. Serve actually said part of what I was going to say, and Piper did as well, and Epi with the Steelman. So there's not a lot I can say. Like, I just don't. I'll reiterate. Don't be afraid to correct or engage a fellow atheist when you see mistakes, because at that point you're actually helping them, and in some cases it might be helping you. So I mean, work things out like that, and then that's if you're wanting to engage in these kind of discussions and debates. It'll help a lot.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to call it a night there. So thank you very much, everybody. I'd like to thank all the guests that have been on. Nick Suter, Cerberus, of course, thank you, Gus. Piper, good to see you for the first time. I hope you'll come back. Headless, as always, one of the more regulars. Gus, a regular, as I said. Hillary's, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate the input. Mark Reed, who's always busy and always a pleasure to have on. Thank you very much, Mark. Jeff Svechkok, what a wonderful person. Go and check out his channel. And of course, Epi, we couldn't do this without you. I'd also like to thank everybody that's been in chat and putting up interesting questions, etc. Tux, Zogalix. Haven't met you before, but thank you for your input in the side chat. Been really great. Titan, Lucky, of course, always a pleasure. And I'll see you next week. And many others besides Geo Sam. Snake, if you can come a little earlier, please, I'd love you to join the panel. Doubting Thomas. Brojo, of course, Brojo. Fantastic. Otangelo, thank you for coming by again. We start at 7 CST normally. So if you want to jump in at some point, on whichever topic we're on. That would be really great. We would love to have you on. Scott Duke, thank you, Scott. I love that man. He's great. Sorry, and don't clip that, by the way. Nobody clip that. There we go. And if there's anybody I've missed, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for coming. And yeah, we will see you all next week at the same time for another fascinating topic, which we will decide during the week, I dare say. So yeah, thank you very much. And here we go. Let me get to the outro. So there it
Thank
is.
you all.
Thank you, everybody.